Okay, here we go.
That's good.
Hey everybody, today we are debating Christianity versus Satanism versus atheism versus polytheism, and we're starting right now. So glad to have you here, everybody. This is an exciting time. We are going to get to hear 4 different views, and our guests are going to share not only their view in an exploratory way for people, in other words, just so that they can learn the view, but also there might be a little bit of challenging. So it might be that if everybody, let's say, agrees to objective morality, I doubt that's true, but it might be true, you guys, our speakers might kind of press each other a little bit and say, you know what, I think that polytheism gives a better accounting for this, theoretically, not trying to put words in Ocean's mouth. But I will let the speakers introduce themselves in just a moment. I just want to quick highlight a couple of things. One is, we are very excited, kind of trying to get this charity spotlight, and this is a nonpartisan charity, so Be the Match is not a Christian or atheist charity or anything. They are just focused on bone marrow donations. They're looking for your bone marrow, not necessarily your money. If you want to donate, you can, but bone marrow is basically you give your time and frankly, it's a painful process, but you end up saving a life. I think this is something all the debaters would agree on. We all are united in this, at least, even if we disagree the rest of the time. This is a charity worth checking out if you haven't heard of it. They cover all the medical costs. You are just literally giving your bone marrow and your time, and like I said, it's painful, but you save a life. So with that, we are going to move into introductions. We're very honored to have these people here. We have one new guest. This is going to be fun to have Mark here. And then we also have 3 returning guests. They've been friends of the channel, and so glad to have a new friend here today. I'm going to start with Frustrated Atheist, who you've met before. We're glad to have him back on. And Frustrated Atheist, if you want to share about what's been going on at your channel, I'll give you a second to do that. And I just want to remind everybody that Frustrated Atheist and everybody else's links are in the description. Highly encourage you to check them out, because even if you don't agree with them at all, even if you say, that SJ, just... is you can at least understand her straight from the horse's mouth. You can go and check out all these different speakers and hear their perspective, and there's no more charitable way than hearing it straight from them. So now, Frustrated Atheist, thanks for coming on, and what have you been up to? Oh, I think you might be on mute yet.
Hey, Frustrated Atheist, you're muted, buddy.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, I've been doing absolutely nothing on my channel. It's become an ongoing joke with a lot of my friends in the community, because they're like, yeah, you need to put out content, and I'm like, yeah, I'm getting around to it, but hopefully sometime after this I'll be doing it.
You bet.
Yeah, that's it.
You bet. Still linked below, and past footage, my guess is that you've got past content on there still.
Yes, I still have past content.
Oh yeah, there you go. So still stuff to see at Frustrated Atheist link, and glad to have you here again. And then Mark, thanks for coming on. This is first time, and we're stoked to have you here. What have you been up to?
I like to sit on my couch. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
I sit on my couch. I troll on Twitter. I'm doing a doctoral thesis on the studies of SJ apologetics, a way of life for life. And yeah, that's about what I do.
Rad.
Yes.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And as mentioned, all the links are in the description, folks. Ocean is no stranger. He's been here before to help moderate as well as to speak. And so glad to have you here, Ocean. What have you been up to?
I've been up to a lot of things, but as far as what I've been going on with as far as in this scene, I've been on this channel a couple of times now. How many times have you been here? This is like the 3rd or 4th time that I've been on this show.
Adding up.
And yeah, I'm gonna be here too much, man. You gotta bar me from coming on. My YouTube channel is starting up now. I've been uploading some previous debates that I've been involved in. And other than that, if you want to contact me or anything like that, I'm on Twitter, fairly active, chasing people around and all that jazz. So that's me.
You bet. Glad to have you here as well. And SJ, also a returning visitor. Glad to have you here, SJ. What have you been up to?
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I've been here a few times now, and I appreciate coming on. It's always nice. And so I've been keeping busy lately. I've been trying to write my second blog on Bart Ehrman, so I've been doing that kind of stuff. And so I have a lot of blogs I've been busy working on, and then I've been working on my school stuff. So I'm doing school research as well on. I talked to you about it earlier on ethical decision making and that kind of stuff.
You betcha. Really interesting. And so we are stoked to move into this conversation where we will be bringing up different issues for everybody to weigh in on. Basically, these are pretty general, and so we haven't given them much prep time. We had, in the sense that we gave them vaguely what the topics would be, and this is going to be pretty darn spontaneous and open discussion, which I think people prefer most in general. Obviously, we are not saying that the speakers are claiming to represent their whole group. That's pretty obvious, I hope. This is just kind of their perspective from their point of view, from within their worldview, not claiming an absolute hold on their own view or group. So with that, glad to have you here. And audience, thanks for being here. You can, if you have a question for the Q&A, which we'll do following the discussion, just put an @moderndaydebate, and we will ask your question to the speakers. If you let us know which speaker in particular you want, or all the speakers, that's cool too. Super chats we'll do first, and next, well, if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button. We're glad to have you here. We're shooting for diversity. We really do want to be nonpartisan and have everybody feel as welcome as possible. And so we don't care what you are, Christian, atheist, all the strange creatures in between. We're glad you're here. So with that, I just want to start with a more familiar one. Let's say, for example, someone were to ask you, the speakers, if you believe in objective morality, how do you account for it? Or maybe you would say, hey, I don't actually think that there's any sort of promise of objective morality on my worldview, or maybe you even think that it just can't work. So I will let you decide who speaks first on this. Objective morality, do you buy it? And do you think, if you do buy it, do you think that your worldview has maybe an ideal explanation for it?
Who wants to start?
Go ahead.
Sorry, can the question be repeated real quick?
You bet. So if you do believe in objective morality, or if you want to reject it, that's fair game. Maybe you're something like a moral error theorist, no problem. But if you believe it, maybe you'd want to say, hey, I think that my worldview can offer the best foundation for objective morality, and here's why.
I can speak to this if you'd like.
Sure, you bet.
Okay, so I have the Christian worldview, and I feel that Christianity well explains objective morality. I feel that we do have objective morality. So what that means basically is that we have moral standards and duties, and we adhere to these moral standards and duties, and they transcend human cultures, human eras, human timelines, that kind of thing. And so instead of being relative, so the counterpart to objective morality is the idea of being a relative moralist, and would, in your views as a relative moralist, suggests that our morals are relative to people's conceptions of them within their culture. So going back to a relativist view, for example, the Nazis during World War II would have been acting culturally appropriate when they followed what they did because they were going by the Nazi rules at that point. So instead I use the objective value, saying that we can actually go back and we can make assessments about different cultures and different times based on an objective moral values and duties. And to speak to this idea of, do we have objective moral values and duties, and the idea of an ought, a moral ought, this goes back to David Hume a little bit. It also goes back to Immanuel Kant. But the idea of a moral ought suggests that all of humanity, regardless of where we are, when we are, and how we are, all of humanity has within our conscience a compass. And we've actually seen studies from someone called Shalom Schwartz. He wrote something called Universal Moral Values in 2012. And he said the astonishing finding in 2012 was that no matter where the culture was and what part of the world, he took thousands and thousands of data points all over the world, and he found that no matter where anyone was, we all had the top value of benevolence. And then there's another study by a person called Kinnear, which is out 2000, and a couple of other co-authors, and they surveyed all of different world religions, along with even atheism and humanism in the United Nations, and they found that all over the world, basically everyone has the same value, that we know we ought to follow the golden rule. Now, someone might say, well, do we follow the golden rule? That's the is-ought distinction, but we know that we ought to do it regardless of whether or not we do it. So I would say that this is well explained by the Christian point of view, because we have the moral lawgiver who actually gave us these moral oughts, which are moving us towards benevolence. That would suggest a divine moral lawgiver, and that's in support of Christianity.
You bet. By the way, forgive me, I always get ahead of myself. If everybody wants to share, in case there's anyone new here, if you want to share your worldview at the start, I didn't introduce everybody by their worldview. Sorry about that. SJ, if you probably figured out, everybody, that SJ is a Christian, and we will let the other speakers identify what they identify as. So.
Go ahead and call on people, James. I think that we're all kind of like...
Yeah.
Everyone's really want to jump on it, so...
Yes. Well, Ocean, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. We've got to hear you weigh in on this with Mike Winger before, so...
Yeah. And I've said before that I'm like, when it comes to grounding of morality, I'm fairly agnostic on it. I think that from the polytheist perspective, you can ground morality in nature, you can ground morality in deity. It doesn't necessarily matter to me. I think that a lot of the conversation about morality has shown that where it's grounded is a fairly inaccessible idea. But from the polytheists, we have a position that essentially morality can be seen manifested in culture, it can be seen manifested individually, and it can be seen manifested in nature. And whether or not, I don't think that I would hold that morality is objective in the same way that the Christian does, even if it is grounded in deity. I would think that, because it seems that Christians hold an idea that specific actions are good or evil, irrelevant of context. And I think the context definitely figures into moral frameworks.
You bet. Well, how about you, Mark?
It's an interesting topic. For the viewers, I'm holding the position of Satanism. I'm a Satanist, which is an atheistic philosophy.
You're breaking up, dude.
Yeah.
Let me turn the video off.
If you didn't hear, Mark happens to be Satanist. So we are going to let Mark explain his position of Satanism. I think you might be surprised. When I read about it a number of years ago, I was like, oh, it's much more complex than I thought. So, Mark, if you are still there, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, there's different flavors of Satanism. You've got the theistic Satanism. You've got the atheistic Satanism, LaVeyan Satanism, and then you've got everything in between. You've got people who hold the devil to be an actual being in and of itself with supernatural powers. Then you have the people that hold it to be an icon, an object to focus upon, if you will. And the LaVeyan Satanists don't hold to a theistic deity in any form or way. So basically, that's, anything in between can be called Satanism, but I lean towards the LaVeyan philosophy more so than an actual devil's. Insofar as objective morality, I had this decades and over the centuries, and with societies, and when societies form, when new societies, conglomerate, they decide for themselves what's moral and what's not. And we can see this, for instance, age of consent, if you will. Go back long enough in time, and you can see the age of consent is a very different animal than what we have today. If you go back far enough in time, certain things that we hold to be repugnant was quite normal, and over time it develops, and you find what works, what doesn't work, what's beneficial, and what's not, and you discard what's not beneficial and you expound upon what's beneficial.
You bet.
So you don't need a moral lawgiver to understand that I do not want to get hurt, so I'm not going to hurt someone. I do not want to get raped, so I am not going to rape someone. So I don't think you need some kind of, absolute that is separate from us to realize that certain actions are just not good. And we could call them immoral if you want, but that's a human distinction. It's, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. And last, frustrated atheist, if you want to weigh in on this as well.
Well, kind of like just what Squirtsford said. Atheism also has its whole different sections. You'll have people who hold to a more objective morality standpoint, some who believe that's subjective, and some who just don't really care. I personally fall under the fact that I think that it is indeed subjective, but there's no way that you can have objective truths within it. So there are certain things that we know are wrong, and there are certain things where the wrong line is kind of blurred, and so that's really about it.
You bet. Any disagreements? Is there anybody in the group who would say, so-and-so said this, I'd like to challenge that?
Well, I think that one thing that Ocean said that I'd like to challenge is the idea that our objective morality could be grounded in nature. I wanted to see if he can expand on exactly what he meant by that.
What do you mean? Like, I get confused as far as what it means to ground it in deity. So it seems that, like, to me, if it's going to be grounded in deity, the distinction between grounding it in deity and grounding it in nature is that deity has an agency to decide what it is to be good or evil. I think grounding it in nature functionally does a very similar thing, except it just doesn't require an agency behind it.
So, see, my point is, and I think one thing that we need to expand or at least discuss a little bit is the distinction between the is and ought, and between the idea of moral duties, because there have been studies that have shown that the world basically has the same moral oughts on what we should do, and so the question is, if we have these moral oughts and the world is going by them, and I've named 2 studies, but I actually have more. Such as, for example, the World Values Surveys, and I don't mean the World Values Surveys, I mean the Globe Studies from Robert House and some other authors. But there are studies indicating that the world basically has a view that we should be benevolent. So if we don't have a moral lawgiver, where'd that come from? I mean, nature doesn't just decide that. Why should the whole world know that we should be benevolent, for example?
We all have a very similar evolutionary background. So it makes sense that as social creatures, with our evolutionary background, that we would value benevolency between each other because it helps us survive. And that's
well, so does selfishness. Some could make the argument that selfishness and survival of the fittest would help some people survive.
And in some contexts, selfishness is valuable. So.
And I can actually give an example. Of that. So whenever, let's say you're at your house and someone breaks into your house with a gun, selfishness in that case would be that you would prefer that you and your family live over the person who just broke into your house. And so selfishness does play a role in this, but also so does living amongst other people. So in this case and scenario, yes, you may have killed someone, but the person who broke in kind of went against what is the norm for society that we need to have in order to remain within society. So you're killing him in the act of breaking into your house would actually be a better situation than having him kill you.
Gotcha.
Selfishness manifests as being the moral choice in a number of situations. I'd say that anybody who has a value on any capitalistic framework recognizes the value of selfishness. That's the you negotiate for a higher salary because of a certain amount of selfishness.
So, and I agree with you. I completely agree with you. There are certain situations where we see selfishness manifested, and we've been seeing that probably since the beginning of time. If we were able to go back to the beginning of time and the beginning of humanity, we could probably see the evidence that suggests that certain instances, selfishness is something that thrives. So if we say that selfishness thrives, and if some would say that selflessness thrives, why is it that selflessness is actually superior to selfishness as far as moral oughts for the world?
We'd have to find out whether or not that premise is the case. I don't necessarily agree that selflessness is always superior to selfishness. I do think that benevolence, like, is definitely of a prime value. That helping people up is definitely good, but you should also be helping people up. You can't help people up unless you're already up yourself, So go ahead.
Well, let me tell you what the order of these values was. So if we went to Schwartz's study, and his first value was benevolence. The second one is universalism, which is basically the idea of trying to be very good to all of humanity. And the third value of importance was self-direction. And self-direction is quite related to selfishness in a way. A lot of times you're figuring out your own purpose, your own cause, what you're going to do. So that sort of thing works in with our overall values for the whole world.
And that would agree. Sorry, that would agree with a polytheistic framework as well as a monotheistic framework. That when we look at morality across culture in polytheistic civilizations, we do see a lot of these values show up. The Havamal, for example, the words of Odin, heavily value hospitality, and you see that kind of thing manifest in a number of cultures. But how it manifests is very different depending on environment and depending on the gods that are venerated.
You have to have a modicum of both. It has to weigh out, because without selfishness, you're not going to be able to be selfless. You're not going to be able to help another individual if they deserve it. If they don't deserve it, and if you're not selfish, you're not going to be in the position either way. So if you come from a position where you ought to do something, I don't think that's governed by every person in every society and every race. Certain individuals think you ought to cause harm to another individual for their sexual preference. Certain individuals think you should do certain actions that might be violent and end to others because of the difference. Right. Now, the selfishness. I hate this internet.
I think you might have to go without video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got this weak connection. So when you have these issues, you have to weigh, the benevolency of it. I tend to, as a Satanist, you tend to lean towards the selfish side. But then again, it's a necessity to help. If you do not have anything, you do not have anything to offer. And if that makes any sense whatsoever. And it changes for everybody. And it's not a universal absolute. And it goes in Germany.
Yeah, he's still. Yeah. Sorry, Scorsifer Man, you're still breaking up a lot.
Okay.
I want to toss an idea out there that the Germanic pagan has an idea that relates to morality called frith, which would be, and frustrated atheists may have come across this concept, that it's peace between people, and that there's different levels of relation that you might say, like there's peace between people in your hearth, there's peace between people of your family, and then there's peace between people of in your society or outside of your society. And it's generally seen in the Germanic concept that you want to keep peace between people unless that peace is broken. And once that peace is broken, then there's there's another way of dealing with people, such to say. So, things that might be considered like mean, I guess, can be considered justified once somebody has broken frith. So, and I think that that's how a lot of history has come together. We declare war on people that have broken peace as societies, and we might get into fights with somebody who have broken peace with us in one way or another, between individuals or even between families. So that's one way of kind of looking at it. It seems to be a near universal concept between humans.
Right. Well, I also think that one of the a few of the 9 satanic statements kind of cover it. Kindness to those who deserve it. Vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Responsibility to the responsible, and what have you. It's kind of a form of the. I would liken it to the Eightfold Path of the Dhammapada, the Buddhist thought. You don't want to cause suffering, but it's a necessity in terms of the Satanist, if that makes any sense.
I think was there a satanic phrase that instead of turn the other cheek, it's if someone strikes you on the face, smash him in his, or something like that.
Basically,
I want to say that's Levian.
I want to ask something about, because I'm a little bit familiar with Levian, and I looked at their website, the Church of Satan, and I found the Ayn Rand references, Ayn Rand references there, and a lot of it focused on her focus on egoism, and it's one of those ethical dimensions that I find fascinating, and also I think that it's something that we should strive against, being egoists. But it's interesting because that's actually the view that is taken in the Church of Satan. And I'm wondering, Mark, is that your view? Do you feel like egoism is a superior ethical framework that people should use when they're making assessments?
No, I don't think it's a superior framework. I don't think anything's superior to anything else. What I think is you have to find what works for you. You have to find something that you're able to make peace with and you're able to function with. More or less, I would say, yeah, egoism has something to do with it. And it is more or less a philosophy of self and self-indulgence. But then again, it's not superior to anybody else's setup or framework. Also, while I am egocentric and while I am selfish to a larger, lesser degree, I also realize that I have family and loved ones, and I have friends, and I enjoy their company, and I don't want to be, I don't want to see them harmed or see them come to ill or whatnot. So I'm not going to practice anything that would cause those individuals to come to harm or see something ill. So, to the degree, yeah, I'm very egotistical. Yes, I am very selfish, but within what I find to be reasonable bounds that don't cause harm to other individuals.
Forgive me, I know SJ that you have a response, but I hate to interrupt you, just so we can keep moving from one topic to the next. I guess we'll give Mark the last word on that, and then we'll move into eternal destination, if you believe in it. So you might, we've got all sorts of different varieties from each of these worldviews, in which some people might even identify as different stripes of theists and don't believe in it. So if you do believe in it, and how you might account for, so let's say near-death experiences. Obviously you don't have to believe these if you believe in an afterlife, but curious to hear your guys' take on these things and whether or not you think there is an afterlife. Why don't we start backwards this time? So Mark, we'd love to hear from you, and then we will go to Frustrated Atheist, Ocean, and then SJ.
Okay, I don't believe that there's an afterlife. I don't believe there's an eternal destination. I'm firmly convinced that when I die, I will cease to exist. There will be nothing afterwards. Now, I'm not right. I just don't know. That's what I hold to be truth. But I could very well be wrong.
You bet. Thanks, Mark. And then Frustrated Atheist?
Yeah, I'm with Christopher there. I don't believe that there's an afterlife. As far as the whole entire near-death experience, I do believe that there is science that can explain that. So,
you bet. Ocean.
So I'm agnostic on the afterlife as well. I'll say really quickly, Discourse for, by the way, to piggyback off the last conversation we had on morality, that I've read the Satanic Bible and I've found a lot of positive things in it. So I'll put that there. That I think that especially at the time that it was written, it's a very forward-thinking book. That being said, about the afterlife, for me, there's an afterlife that I posit and presume, which is the Norse afterlives. There's multiple, and that from a polytheistic framework, I imagine that any polytheist that is putting their spiritual investment into the gods would be taken care of by those gods that they put that spiritual investment into the afterlife, and that for atheists there would be kind of a catch-all as an afterlife, that we believe in the goddess Hel, who has an afterlife called the Helheim. It's the land of the dead, and she's the matron of the dead. Now, is there an afterlife, can I prove it? Can I demonstrate it for you? No. But it seems to be a belief that has a large consistency among the rest of humanity. It seems to be intuitive, and I think that we can posit it for those reasons, and at least hold to it without with justification. Now, as far as how that relates to the Christian idea of hell and heaven, I think that Christians in their spiritual investment with their God will go to heaven. I think that they're probably correct in an assessment of hell that hell is without their deity, which would mean that as a polytheist, when we put our spiritual investment in other deities, that means that we would be without their God that is a God of exclusivity.
Gotcha. SJ, thanks so much from all three of you. I appreciate it.
Well, one nice thing about Christianity is Christianity is based on faith, and it's based on the idea that if we have faith and if we choose to accept the sacrifice that Jesus has made for us, that we can go to heaven. And so that's not based on our works. So that differentiates Christianity from a lot of other belief systems out there. And one of the nice things as far as heaven, just like Ocean said, he's right. Yes, heaven is the choice to basically align yourself with the Lord. And hell is the choice to move away from him. And so a lot of people always talk about fire and brimstone and that kind of hell. And I just think kind of consistently with I think what you said, Ocean, that a lot of Christians think is that hell is just really in existence without God. And as far as near-death experiences, yeah, I do believe that those occur. I do. And I, in fact, my mom, when she was pregnant with me, when she was having me, my mom actually went outside of her body at one point, was able to see herself in the hospital room giving birth to me. So I do know that even in my own family, I have an example of my mom kind of having a really crazy experience like that.
And I think that those kind of experiences edify, like that we can. You can have a justification for some kind of afterlife on the basis of those kinds of experiences. Now, does that mean that it's factual? No, but it does mean that there's a justification in holding it. But to piggyback on what you said about the concept of hell, I think that if you just define hell as being separation from God, then from a polytheist perspective, hell is a much more interesting thing, because it would include every other afterlife of from polytheistic frameworks. So you have the Egyptian afterlife, the Norse afterlife, and all these other afterlives. And it seems like there's a lot of different descriptions of them out there, and the description of heaven to me seems like to me it comes off as a prison. You may disagree. Heaven, Christians describe heaven, and they're very romantic about it. And if they want to go there, that's great. But with the description that I've read of it in Revelation and so on, it seems very much like singing and praising church for all of eternity. And the pagan descriptions of afterlives have a lot more going on, I think, than that. So if there is an eternal soul, and if there are afterlives, it makes more sense to me to put my spiritual investment elsewhere rather than Christianity.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting in regards to the afterlife or near-death experiences, when you ask a Christian to find heaven or to find hell, you will not get a straight answer across the board. You will have different answers from different denominations of Christians. SJ's view on hell will not be the Southern Baptist view on hell. The Mennonite view on hell is a little bit different as well in various ways. And then you've got the individuals who think it is literally a fire and brimstone torture fest for eternity. And that the denominations themselves can't come up with a coherent, solid definition of what will it be like in heaven and what will it be like in hell, lends me towards the end that there's nothing really there. That's a belief that they hold, and if the belief makes them feel better, that's great, wonderful. But for me, I the differentiation, there's something about it that makes the back of your head itch. And one thing is, when you can suppress that itch, you keep your faith. But when that itch gets to the point that you have to scratch it, you're in trouble. Now, as far as near-death experiences, I have been in situations where it was a flatline situation. I don't remember anything. I was like, hey, why is everyone looking down at me? How did I get here? What's going on? So I've never had a near-death experience. I don't have a family member who's had one, except for my crazy cousin who we just ignore, especially around Thanksgiving. So, again, not saying, anybody's right or wrong.
Yeah. I kind of agree with that. I've always said this, though, that I don't ever discredit people's personal experiences, because that's all on you. That's something that you had, or someone that had that might have convinced you or whatever. But to me, I just, as Ocean said, whenever he said this earlier, that does it make it right? Absolutely not. But I don't ever discredit it, because that's something that you personally had, and I haven't had the same type of situation as you have. So I don't ever, when people sit there and tell me that they know this from personal, some kind of personal experience they had, or some personal revelation they had with their deity, I just don't ever cover it, and unless I say exactly what I just said, which was, that's fine that you did, but that doesn't necessarily make it real. So yeah.
You bet. So, got an interesting one. Ultimate reality. How would your worldview account for it? So maybe even we have an idealist here. You never know. So excited to hear all of your guys' views, or everybody's views. So we'll go back down the original order. So SJ, if you want to share first how you would account for ultimate reality, or if you would accept its existence, and we'll go from there.
We're all just a big game of Sims.
Can you clarify? Because when you say ultimate reality, I'm assuming you're talking about people having an ultimate purpose. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can understand why you'd think that. I mean, more like the existence of everything. So you think of it as like kind of synonymous with maybe the universe, something like that. We'll just say
talking about like cosmological cause, or are you talking about like
something yeah, some of you will probably take something that kind of position, namely explanation for the universe. Sorry, thanks for your
yeah, for an explanation of the universe, I look to what scientists basically say. So I look to the Big Bang, and I think that actually the Big Bang, because it gives us a start date about 13.8 billion years ago, I think that gives us pretty good support for a deity, an all-powerful, omniscient, immaterial deity that existed prior to the start of the universe 13.8 billion years ago. So I would say the cosmological argument actually is a pretty strong argument in support of God.
You bet. We'll go down the line, I suppose. So, Mark, if you have a take on this, or I should say what your take is, we're excited to hear it.
Yeah. Ultimate reality, or reality in general. I hold that reality is basically all that is real. No, I'm kidding. I believe the universe came into existence a couple of billion years ago, like SJ. The factor that created ultimate reality, or the reality we have today, I don't think is a creator necessarily. Reality is basically what's real. I think what can be demonstrably shown to exist independent of oneself, and can be verified by other individuals to match that, the one individual's definition or concept. If you have a rock that you to a wolf and everybody sees the wolf, it's pretty safe to say, yeah, that's a rock carved into the shape of a wolf. You can demonstrably show that exists and that is real. I don't want to say limit to see, touch, feel, taste. You can, by intuition, you can get the gitchy feeling, as I like to call it, about certain things, whether or not, you get a weird sensation that somebody might want you, and it's just you to feed it, things like that. But, I don't think there's anything supernatural or metaphysical within the existence of reality. Reality is all that is real, to quote song lyric from Possessed.
You bet. Thanks, Mark. And frustrated atheist?
So, I kind of my answer would be similar to Sorcerer's. The fact that when we're talking about ultimate reality, about what we know to be reality, we first, of course, start off the axiom that we do exist, and that is one to just get the ball rolling, where then we can pull in other people who are around us, and we have to work upon those that first initial assumption that I exist, you exist, and everyone else around us exists. And then after that, it's just going by what we really see and what we can actually demonstrate that does exist and that is what is real. And so that's pretty much how we can determine what is part of the ultimate reality.
You bet. And Ocean?
So ultimate reality conversations are kind of interesting to me, because it gets into, like, the conversation kinds of shifting from a couple of different areas, where we get into, like, do we ontologically ground reality, or are we looking at physically explaining reality? And from the polytheistic view, there's a number of different ideas about how to explain both of those concepts. So I've gone through a couple of them before, even on this channel, where there's an Egyptian idea of Nu being a first cause creator entity that manipulates material that's already extant. There's the Greek idea of chaos that comes into being a kind of personification of randomness, that then from which grows the rest of the universe. And then there's the Norse idea that it's a little bit more complex than a lot of those others. It deals with the gods come later in the Norse image. And what started is this idea called Orlog, and which comes out of a chaotic unity between material that already exists. And then out of Orlog comes the Yggdrasil, which is what a lot of people are familiar with as being the world tree, and from that grows universes and realms. So an Orlog means like prime law, which a Christian could probably pounce on and be, wait, but the Orlog tends to be used to describe predestination or destiny, and then there's another concept that honestly would take me a long time to explain, called the web of the weird, which is something that is used to explain things like destiny or the passage of time. So essentially, like, there's multiple ideas in polytheism to kind of examine from a number of different ways. They seem to be consistent with a Big Bang image. I don't think that the Big Bang is really something that can be used as confirmation for either the polytheist or the Christian, except that it's consistent with it. And in being consistent with it, it's not something that can be used to tear down Christianity or polytheistic frameworks. But I don't think that it can be used to necessarily make a confirmation either, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Appreciate it from all of you. And anybody have any disagreements? Something where you're like, no, that didn't quite, I don't buy that. Curious to hear.
I want to agree with Ocean on something, and that is that the beginning of the universe doesn't tell us about the Christian God necessarily. It gives us evidence that there is a God. It doesn't get into details on the specifics. So
There's
the
at
only
least
the
one.
only evidence we have, the evidence that we have is that the God is all powerful. The God is personal. So we are given some information about God, but some might say, well, maybe a Muslim person could argue that that's their God. You know, so it could be that sort of thing.
I don't necessarily know how you can get personal deity out of the Big Bang.
I
I think that you can have the Big Bang be completely impersonal. That it just be a starting point.
I think intentional. I would say that the Big Bang is, the evidence of the universe and the evidence of if you just look at the universe and the way it's been inflating or expanding, basically over 13.8 billion years, and how it's speeding up. I think that supports the evidence of a powerful force that is intentional. I would say that you definitely would say it's intentional.
But going from an intentional force to a personal theistic deity is a mighty big step. Like, okay, now Big Bang, if there was a cause for the Big Bang, obviously there was. What it might be, we don't necessarily know. We can only, just fathom with our, finite brain. But if there was a cause to the universe, it may very well have been an all-powerful being, or it might have been a being powerful enough to influence this universe, this line of existence, this branching of whatever existence is or could be. This is not necessarily the satanic view on it, nor is it the atheist view. This is just some weird fat dude on his couch that has far too much time on his hands speculating. Now,
I have to ask, Mark, can you clarify if when you're a Satanist, does that mean, and I know this might, you were pointing out how you think Christians have a lot of variations within the Christian faith, but are there any Satanists who believe in Satan, or are all Satanists atheists?
Go ahead, Russ.
I was just going to say he did clarify that in the beginning whenever he said that there are theistic Satanists.
Right there, I could be mistaken, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody in the chat will scream. But the Temple of Set is an offshoot that holds more or less to a theistic being named Lucifer. The Church of Satan doesn't hold to an actual being, Satan, per se. It's more or less a philosophy of the area of Christianity, in part to gain attention and to troll Christianity and to thumb up the norm, basically.
Yeah, I was about to say that the Church of Satan was kind of like the first troll there was, because of the fact that they did it just to do that to the theists.
LaVey seemed to, I think that a lot of the reasons why the Church of Satan was started, and at least according to LaVey, seems to be that it's a pushback against both Christianity and response movements to Christianity.
Exactly.
That's what I got out of reading him.
Exactly. Kind of a carnival-esque approach to the issues.
He was involved in LaVey was involved in the circus scene, right? He was an organ player. Yeah, calliope
player. Yeah. I wouldn't say, but there are offshoots of Satanism that actually adhere to the theistic version of Satan. And of course, there's the others that have their own variation of Satan. I'm trying to think of a name off the top of my head, and for some reason I want to go to E.A. Coating, who is supposedly a prominent black magician and calls demons forth for his bidding, and he ranks Satan and Lucifer as separate entities in a certain hierarchy with Belial and Asmodean and a few other names. So, I mean, just like with Christianity, there's a broad, not as broad as Christianity, but a broad spectrum of who and what exactly is Satan. A really good set of books. Jeffrey Burton Russell did a very extensive study on the concept of Satan and Mephistopheles. I can't say that.
Mephistopheles.
Let's see. It's Lucifer in the modern day. Then the devil in the ancient and pre-ancient times. He has a whole line of books that covers only Satan, and it very interesting read, very in-depth. The guy really went through the motions and lists all kinds of different concepts of Satan, where it came from, the concept of evil, the concept of the devil. And just like, within everybody, there's different concepts for different cultures and different races.
You bet. Thank you very much, everybody. If you had anything else to say, I didn't want to stop you before you move on.
No, I'm fine. Sorry.
You bet. So, if it depends on how you define your worldview, but for all of you, who does? I mean, certainly you probably think you have the most evidence for your worldview, but maybe you're some sort of, at the same time, some people might be new to the idea of kind of basing, you could say, taking a Jordan Peterson approach, basically, or a decision theorist approach. You might say, as a decision theorist, I think my utility will be maximized by taking this worldview. And some are evidentialists, so they would say, nope, I don't use decision theory, I only use evidence to decide which worldview I'll be, even if I would have a better outcome with any other particular view. I just go by the evidence, baby. So, want to hear your thoughts, everybody's thoughts. You might say,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
That was a very 60-ish
That's
sentence there.
I'm a huge Austin Powers fan. So
I was about to say that was Austin Powers.
yeah. So this kind of movie's my bag, baby. So basically, excited to hear your thoughts, everybody, because we have such an eclectic mix of people here. So we can go backwards. So, and by that I mean based on the pictures. And just got a border in. By the way, Texas Outlaw said, hey, can you get a border in really quick? So now if you see, your picture will still be there, as well as it'll have your title of what you identify as. It'll pop up in a second on the live stream for the speakers. And glad to have that, so that'll hopefully make it a little bit clearer for people. And with that, we will go the opposite direction. So with the border, we have Ocean on the far left. Ocean, if you want to share what your view is.
He had
on
to
this.
step away for a second.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry about that. So next up, we'll go with the frustrated atheist. We're glad to have you here. If you want to share, if you're an evidentialist or decision, you could be both. But anyway, go ahead. Excited to hear you answer.
Can you repeat what the question was exactly?
Yeah. So whether you're an evidentialist, if you say, I only rely on the evidence, that's the only thing that guides my taking a particular worldview. Or you might say, oh, actually, I kind of do like the Jordan Peterson route, and I feel like my utility will be maximized in a decision theoretic model by going with this worldview. And so the thrust behind decision theory is, if you're not maximizing your own utility, you're not being optimally rational. And so that's why some decision theorists, like some people, take the Jordan Peterson route for that reason. A lot of them probably don't, they're not familiar with decision theory, but you can use it to, so go ahead.
I'm not familiar with the Jordan Peterson route type of thing per se. I probably have heard of it before, just not worded as what Jordan Peterson would word it. But I do believe in going after evidence for how things have happened and whatnot. Evidence is definitely one of the biggest parts of figuring out what is and is not real, and what is and is not how the world works. And so, if I'm going to try to if I'm going to be as completely honest as possible, then I try to go after more evidence-based routes. So,
You bet.
yeah.
Ocean?
I'm sorry, I was absent for
Oh,
a
that's
second.
right. Sorry about
Um,
that.
yeah.
Okay. Basically, talking about whether or not if you're an evidentialist. So if you say, "Hey, I'm pure. My decision on which worldview, or the reason that I am a worldview of any particular type, is because purely the evidence." Or a person might give an argument from decision theory, or they might maybe not put it in decision theory words necessarily, but take a Jordan Peterson view of saying, "Man, I'm a pragmatist. I go with what works best for me on this planet." So whether you are one camp or the other, or maybe you're both, and you try to synthesize them.
So, from my perspective, I look at kind of an experience approach, very experience-centric view. And from that, I think that's where people justify belief in the physical world, and it's where I think that we have justifications in positing the gods as well. So I think that experience, in the same way that it can justify a physical world, we have at least a justification in having a conversation about the gods at the same time because of spiritual experiences. So, that's how I wind up with polytheism. I think that a lot of other approaches in which you try to dismiss polytheism, you need to come up with a reason for dismissing spiritual experiences, or relabeling them as something else, and having a reason to do that doesn't just simply assert a relabeling. For example, I've heard a lot of arguments of people saying, well, it can be explained in another fashion other than the way that it initially seems, such as like it just being a neurological quirk or insanity or something like that. At the same time, though, you can make that assertion about any physical experience or any experience that you have. And this is the reason why often solipsism comes up in conversations with people that are religious, in debates with atheists or anybody who might be against polytheism or Christianity. It sees that this works for I think more for polytheism, but it's a conversation that comes up with Christians as well, that the atheist in dealing with Christianity must relabel spiritual experiences that Christians have, and they must relabel spiritual experiences that polytheists have in order to deny them. So from that perspective, I think that polytheism is the most straightforward of these approaches when it comes to dealing with experience. And we can examine those experiences and examine traditions that are a record of these experiences through a philosophical grounding, which is what Cicero in ancient Rome was attempting to do with his text on the nature of the gods.
Sorry, Ocean. I just wanted to apologize. I wasn't laughing while you were talking because of what you said. I was laughing because of the chat.
What's going on
someone,
in the chat?
Someone said that they're going to cast a spell for your headache, and then they're like, or you could just take Tylenol.
Or I can do right. Well, I'm trying to drink. I'm drinking caffeine right now, so praise caffeina, goddess of creativity, and.
I worship at the holy bean of the coffee pot. I'm not going to deny it.
There's a good friend of mine who
that's what's in here.
is an atheopagan, who's not you and not Frank, Russ, but she, one of the goddesses that she's like, as she venerates as kind of a parody, is a goddess called Caffeina, who is the goddess of curing headaches, creating headaches, and anxiety, late night creativity, and writing.
Sweet.
Oh lordy. Now that's a goddess you can get behind.
Right. It's just like, you know what? That's ontologically, I can get on board with that.
You bet. So, Mark, excited to hear your response as well.
Yeah. I'm not beholden to either or in between. I'm more or less, it shifts basically. I lean more towards the evidentialist side. I can swayed, and I have been swayed to change my position on a lot of things, worldview wise. Like to jump on Ocean's thing to relabel spiritual experiences to deny polytheism or refute polytheism and Christianity. I wouldn't say so much as a relabel of the spiritual experiences. I think spiritual experiences are valid to you and to the individuals that have them. Now, insofar as what those experiences are and what they were caused by, that that's debatable, and to each their own. You firmly believe that you've had these experiences, and that leads you to come to the conclusion that your polytheistic worldview or theistic worldview is valid, which is perfectly fine and perfectly logical to a larger or lesser degree. Although I hold the position that we don't know, we won't know.
We agree there. That it's
Yeah.
debatable and that we don't know.
Right.
And we're on the same page.
Yeah, all three of us are.
Yeah. So I know SJ holds a different position, and that's great. But I lean towards the evidentialist side, but I can be swayed to change my position in mind completely. You give me enough evidence, and I'm there. I'm done.
You bet. Thank you very much,
Get it.
Mark. And SJ.
So I would definitely say I'm an evidentialist. I appreciate Jordan Peterson's view. Actually, initially I thought he was a Christian, but I've been listening to him a little bit more. And he basically says he lives as if there is a God because he feels like that's a good choice. And so, but he has said he's going to take a few years to figure out whether or not Jesus is the Lord. And so he still hasn't come to a decision on that as far as I can see. So he's kind of unique as far as that. But personally, what I've had a lot of spiritual experiences personally, especially in the last 7 years or so. And so it seems to me that the evidence is there. So because of that, those experiences, though, which I don't think anyone is necessarily going to buy, especially an atheist or a person who's a Satanist or even a polytheist isn't going to buy my experiences. Everyone needs their own. But one of the reasons why I started doing Christian apologetics and writing blogs and things and trying to write rebuttals to atheists and agnostics is because I want to show the evidence is there. Actually, the evidence is there. If you look, you can read books like Cold Case Christianity. We've got a former atheist who started investigating the evidence, J. Warner Wallace, and he came to that conclusion. Lee Strobel, a former reporter in Chicago, he basically was a lawyer, and he came to the conclusion that Christianity is true. And C.S. Lewis is another one. So just former atheists who've done their research, looked for evidence, and they came to the conclusion that Christianity is true.
You bet. So,
Can I piggyback off that a little bit? Because I was addressed that I'm not sure which experiences that you're specifically talking about, and if we get into the specifics of the experience, which I don't think that we should for this particular debate. That I don't think that I would necessarily deny your experiences, not on the basis of them edifying Christianity, because I think that, and a lot of polytheists agree with me on this. I haven't found a polytheist that disagrees with me on this. That Christian experiences, spiritual experiences with their God, validate their relationship with their God. The point that we disagree on isn't whether or not your God exists. It's the particular attributes that are appended to your God that are independent of experience, usually say confirmed in the Bible. The idea of omnipotence, or the idea of omnipresence, or that he is the only God. I think that we don't have to label your experiences necessarily in order to fit the Christian God into a polytheist framework, but the Christian must relabel the polytheistic experiences in order to fit our gods into your framework. They must be demons, they must be lies, they must be something else. or they must be fake, or we're lying, or something like that. I've gotten all that from Christians, that there must be a relabeling of some kind. Whereas from us, we don't relabel your experience. The prayer, edification through prayer, whatever visions that Christians have, we can take it in stride. We can even grant the miracles of Jesus and still hold a polytheist position.
And I personally have an issue with the case for Christ that you brought up. That's a really, really terrible book series, because Strobel tends to take a lot of things at face value in his books. And I know many people who have reviewed the book that they see the way he went about doing his homework, if you will, and he took a lot of things at face value and did not do any more research into it. And so I don't mean to offend you if you liked it, SJ, but it was a terrible book. It really was. So,
well, I have others. I mean, I can go through a laundry list of recommendations. I was just naming a few. Like here's a really good one, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Sean and Josh McDowell. Very, very good book, very well researched. Lots of good information in this book. And here's another one that I would highly recommend is by Green, McKnight, and Marshall. This is a really good book called Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. These are two of at least probably 50 books I have downstairs that I would highly recommend everyone read, but I just gave you a few to start with, just a little starter package.
Yeah, I would definitely not use the Case for Christ though as a starter package.
I have the dictionary. It's a lovely book. I really like it. I actually have the Josh McDowell books, and the Josh McDowells were kind of like a running joke when we were in Bible college, or Josh McDowell himself. I would say he was the apologist's whipping boy. My one friend would call him. Now, interestingly enough, you can take individuals who were ardent Christians, who have done the research and have looked into everything, and they come away with a completely different conclusion. Like SJ's familiar with my background. She knows that I'm an ordained Southern Baptist pastor, and I have formal education in biblical studies and blah 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 church. Through further research and a continuing education, I slowly came out of it. So, there's a laundry list of books you can read that's the exact opposite of Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel and C.S. Lewis and whatnot. Good books, but doesn't necessarily lend credence to the position.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what were we talking about?
Well, I went off topic a little bit, but I was just recommending a few books. But I know I agree with you. You can read other books too. I'm right in the middle of a book by Bart. Actually, I'm almost at the end now of a book by Bart Ehrman. So I'd say that definitely there are other writers with other perspectives, and it's important to look at them all.
Definitely. I mean, for the listeners out there, anything that any four of us say, don't take it. Don't listen to us. Take it with a grain of salt. Look that stuff up. Check it out. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. And I've been wrong so many times. It's just, it's as natural as breathing. So, don't take anything we're saying at face value either to jump off a rust there.
Gotcha.
As Mark would say, don't try this stuff at home. Right.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Religion is dangerous, kids. Only do
Get
it
away
under
from
the
it.
supervision of someone experienced.
It's all fun and games until you raise Belial and kill your mother-in-law.
Glad to get all of your opinions. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been very interesting. I'm like, wow, I honestly just think this is so cool, and a lot of positive feedback from the audience. As we, if you're ready to move into Q&A, maybe next time we will have a legitimate, fatal four-way matchup, not like a cage match, but everybody. Go ahead.
I mean, I'll bring my boxing gloves.
I was just gonna say that you'll find that me and Ocean tend to agree a lot more than we disagree.
Yeah, that's true. I know that last time when we had this kind of discussion, I definitely know that Ocean is volatile, unpredictable in where he's going to take, what position he takes. So I believe you, and I don't mean that in a bad way, Ocean.
Well, no, I like because I think that when sometimes in a lot of these debates there's some atheists that recognize a value with polytheism, and that's grown in more of my interaction with the different atheist personalities in this scene. I think that when you get into atheists like Surus or frustrated atheists, or even to an extent Godless Cranium as well, they seem to say, okay, well, polytheism has a logical framework. It seems to have a consistency about it, and it doesn't have the things that they usually find to be objectionable about other religions. There's other atheists though that take an objection to God belief in general, and I've bumped into a few atheists that are like that.
Right.
Eric Murphy from the atheist community of Austin, for example, does have this objection, and he and I have gone toe to toe over it before. And I imagine that there's plenty of others that are in the scene that would take serious objection to me over basing belief in gods on the basis of experience. It's not like I haven't run into that challenge before. But when it's usually after an extended period of conversation with a lot of atheists in the great debate scene, we get into this situation where I've talked to them. I was like, what is functionally your problem with polytheism? Like how it affects society? What is functionally the issue that you have with it? And I've gotten multiple times, I don't know. I don't think that there is an issue that I have with it.
Well, I don't think polytheists lobby for governing laws to be changed to benefit their belief system, or to be in line with their morals. You won't see a polytheist scream, Odin or death,
Right.
and if you say, hey dude, I'm gay, so polytheist is going to be like, all right, cool. Whereas somebody else might be along the lines of saying that's morally wrong, or let's throw you off the top of a building, or hey, look, I have this gun, it's got too many bullets in it, stuff like that. You don't see that happening with a polytheist, unfortunately. You see that happening with different religions. I'm not going to single any religion out, and I'm sure you can find some extremely idiotic Satanists that do that shit as well.
You can find extremely idiotic polytheists that do it as well.
Yeah,
probably.
They exist.
Especially the
They're
folkish.
not in the majority. Yeah, you get into folkish people, and it's like, oh boy. But
they are nothing but a bunch of neo-Nazis just trying to masquerade in
and a lot of them aren't polytheists anyway. So
yeah.
There was something I was going to say. That polytheism, as far as like different ways of living, diversity in the supernatural and diversity in nature, like are linked in a polytheistic idea. So diversity of lifestyle, polytheism is something that embraces alternative lifestyles, and I think that's a lot of the reason why you see populations of polytheism today are usually people with some kind of alternative lifestyle, because it's accepting of those alternative lifestyles.
One of my favorite stories, Ocean already knows, is the story of Thor cross-dressing.
To get his hammer back, yes.
Yes.
And then he killed all
yeah.
It's a bloodbath afterwards as well.
But it's just a funny story because.
And also at the advice of Loki, if I recall the story correctly. That's a.
Yes, it was.
That explains it then. And,
Loki.
Okay, we got it.
Loki had. I forget exactly how Thor's hammer was.
I forget too.
How Mjolnir was taken away, but Loki had an idea where he suggests that Thor be dressed up as a bride for the giant. I forget the giant too.
I want to say it's Thjazi, but no, it's not Thjazi. It's somebody else. Anyway, I can't remember how he gets the hammer as the story goes, but the story includes
I think it might have been Loki's fault.
The Jotun who has it probably was that the Jotun that has the hammer was willing to exchange it in return for a marriage with the goddess Freya, which has a reputation of being the most beautiful of goddesses. She's a goddess of magic. She's a goddess of to an extent a goddess of fate, and is kind of a representative of the rule-breaking woman. And she says, no, I'm not getting married to him. So Loki suggests that Thor dress up as Freya and wears a veil and everything like that in order to cover himself. And then the wedding story takes place.
Yeah.
But that particular
and it takes a while before he gets his hammer, because they have to.
Loki's
constantly telling him. Yeah, Loki's keep telling the Jotun that no, he can't lift his veil, or she can't lift her veil, yada yada yada. And then finally, when he finally does his hand on the hammer, it's just a complete and utter bloodbath.
The thing about that story, though, if we want to look at the history of it, it does originate with Snorri Sturluson, and there's a possibility that particular story was crafted by Christians or modified by Christians in order to build a sort of embarrassment around the concept of Thor.
Oh.
It's possible. It's also possible that it's a completely, original legend. But there's when you're looking at the heathen legends, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of them are kept or were curated by Christians through a period of time in which that religion was not particularly respected. So, and that comes with the historical analysis of these faiths and trying to reconstruct them. And it's a pretty complex historical journey in order to try and do that. There's a whole sect of polytheism, which I consider myself a part of, called Reconstructionism, that is essentially about trying to weigh those balances between what texts that we have and what archaeology says, and or what evidence that we can glean from archaeology and other historical records.
Yeah, you bet. Super interesting. Just to keep us moving, forgive me, it's super interesting.
Yeah, this is a tangent.
No problem. It's been interesting, though. I think people have enjoyed this. And our first message, actually, I moved this to the top because it's just so good and it's so relevant. Duke Bonanza, thanks for your super chat, who said, I've cross-dressed for less than that. So thank you very much, Duke.
Oh, no. And then right after that, somebody else had, Andrew Shepard says, Duke, haven't we all, Duke? Haven't we all?
I've played a few gigs dressed up as in drag, actually.
Yeah,
we're
so
all,
I mean,
we're all.
You guys are all living it up past what I've done. I
like-
can't say I'm cross-dressed. Sorry.
SJ, I grew up with 3 sisters. I was always forced to put on a dress.
That's funny. It looks like it's probably the first time we've had everybody on the panel has worn a dress before. So glad to have you guys here and a diverse bunch. So we thank you for that, Duke. And Josh Brister, thanks for your super chat, Josh. He says, good job finding an atheist. MDD, Mr. Atheist said MDD is stacking the deck in Christian's favor in his video about me. I did see that video. I think it's like months old, and it didn't mention me by name, but it seemed to imply that. I'm a little bit like James. We had a friendly email communication, Mr. Atheist. I don't know why you're implying I'm stacking the deck for Christians. We're trying to be as, if I ever do stack the deck for Christians, call me out, people. We're trying to have as nonpartisan of a channel as possible. And so, Mr. Atheist, come on. We had a friendly email, and thanks for your super chat, Josh. I guess I don't know if that was directed at any of the speakers.
I actually shot a message to Mr. Atheist before doing this video to see if he wanted to be the atheist on the show. He was unfortunately unavailable, but he didn't seem like he was adverse to coming onto the show.
Maybe next time. We'll try to, Josh, we can try to get him, and we'll invite him here. So we're open to any worldview. If you just got here, we want to have a diverse, we don't want this to be an ideological echo chamber. So Josh Brister also sent another super chat. Thanks, Josh. He said, Ocean would have Aristotle be a utilitarian.
No, I wouldn't.
he added LOL.
So I think he's teasing.
Josh has got some kind of interesting opinions, but I think that and this happens with Christians sometimes, is that a polytheist will say something about morality or so on. And I think that over the course of this conversation, I've highlighted as much as possible that polytheism has variety in addressing a lot of these issues. So the fact that Aristotle says something doesn't mean that the rest of polytheists need to take it doxastically. We can disagree with Aristotle. We can disagree with Plato. There's a number of this. E.P. Butler is a great example of a polytheist who's a PhD in philosophy and is a hard Platonist. He definitely takes what Aristotle says very seriously. There's a lot of other polytheists that don't necessarily agree with Aristotle, and that's fine in polytheism.
It's just like every other thing, like regardless if it's a theistic or atheistic thing, we'll have individuals that will indeed disagree, and that's going to be everywhere, even within polytheism.
Gotcha. And Josh Brister with another super chat. Thanks, Josh. He says the Greek idea is of logos, not chaos. Not sure who it's for.
He's disagreeing with Hesiod. So, if you want to get into the idea of chaos and the idea of logos, and the logos of the prime mover, they're both polytheist ideas. They're also both Greek.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Let's see. Sorry to get distracted. Somebody was mentioning Max Colby.
If you look just to add on to that, if you look at the history of Athens and Sparta, you will see that the Greeks did not agree on everything. They definitely had disagreements with each other.
The Greeks and the who?
If you look at the history of Athens and Sparta, you will see that the Greeks did not agree with each other on everything.
No, I have a very, very good one of my favorite Spartan stories that I don't know if we have time for all that.
Huh.
Someone in the chat said E.P. Butler did it in the library with the cube.
Nice. So
I'm into it.
Thank you for that. This is interesting to hear the variety. So, last super chat from Josh. Thanks so much, Josh. He says polytheistic gods equal abstractions from the true God. My guess is that's for Ocean.
And that was
say again. Sorry.
But you could, if you guys want to, he didn't technically address it to somebody. So if frustrated atheist wants to weigh in too.
Yeah, what he said. What did
he say?
He said
that. Go ahead.
Polytheistic gods equal abstractions from the true God.
My response to that is that's just relabeling again.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was that you've already covered that?
Yeah.
What if the true God is amongst the polytheistic bunch of gods? What
If he's
separates
amongst
the
other
true
gods,
God?
Then what makes him true?
Yeah, what separates him from the other gods?
Any more true or less true than the rest of them?
Probably one of the neatest things that I've ever seen is when people basically say everyone does worship a God. It just is what is the God. And you look at Joshua 24:15 in the Bible, and it talks about choose for this day which God you will serve. And so Joshua in there says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So there's even if you're an atheist or you're a Satanist, there's some form of a God in your life, something you do worship.
Christianity edifying polytheism.
Well, to quote a popular punk band from Canada from the late 80s, I am my own God.
That's definitely the same.
There you go. There you go.
Like Satanism, it's a Jordan Peterson, I say Jordan Peterson because that's what's popular right now, but viewing gods as metaphors isn't new. I think that you can trace it all the way back to Carl Jung, and probably even further than that.
Even Epicurus had some ideas.
And Epicurus was accused by other polytheists at the time of being an atheist because of that. So, viewing the gods as metaphors, or saying like money is your god or something like that, it's not a new concept. But viewing Satan as the metaphor of rebellion and individuality, as a metaphor, is that worshiping a god? It's not according to a polytheist view.
No, technically no.
But it's definitely, you can metaphorically look at it as a pursuit.
You bet. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. This has been honestly fascinating. And Trash Vamp actually said the same thing. She said, this has just been super interesting hearing this variety of people. So thanks for that encouragement, Trash Vamp. Again, of course, all credit to the debaters. I owe you guys so much for coming on and sharing your time and ideas. And we all owe you, so thank you very much. And next we have, we'll quick mention the new subs. Just saw Guzman 1511 and Brian Blankenship. Thanks for joining the community. We're glad to have you here, no matter what side you're on. And also questions. So Tyler Durden has the first question. And for people new here, usually what we do with the super chat, and I'm kind of still deferring to the audience and how they want to do this. Usually we just have questions. If you have a super chat, you can do a comment that you want to shoot directly at one of the speakers, and we'll read it to them and have them respond. And we also push super chats to the start. But if you put Modern Day Debate, at Modern Day Debate in the chat, I will scoop out your question and we're going to read them right now. So Tyler Durden asked for Ocean, is personal experience a reliable means of accurately determining facts about reality? How would one verify that things determined via experience are factual?
I think that in my initial commentary on that, I said that if you're going to take the position of not allowing justification based on seemings, you're going to enter into the conversation, well, we should be denying existence in the physical world because the base of what we have on that is based on seemings on the basis of experience. So, what do you want me to do? There's limitations definitely to the discussion, and it's possible that that we're in a world that is not the physical world. It's possible that we're in a world that doesn't have any gods. It's possible that we're in a world that does have gods. You can make a justification philosophically on idealism, on realism, through experience. So there's multiple ways that you can kind of go about it, but that isn't the fact that you cannot come to true knowledge about any of these things doesn't mean that any of them are wrong. I think that idealism, I think that physicalism, naturalism, polytheism, monotheism, all of these are worthy of discussion because we have good arguments for the batch of them. But there are strong counters to a lot of them, and I've not found one that's a takedown counter that would even be on par to the problem of evil against Christianity, which I would agree with Christians that there's definitely ways of addressing that from a Christian perspective. So, can you get to a fact of the matter through experience? No. But I don't think that you can necessarily access the fact of the matter with a way that has any sort of real dependency through any method. So we can posit different things. For the polytheists, we posit the gods. We posit a natural world in order to explore and discuss them. And we posit the gods in order to explore and discuss spirituality.
You bet. Thank you very much for that answer. And thank you for your question out there, Tyler Durden. And next, I'm going to, forgive me if I read these fast, just trying to get through as many as possible. We're a little over time, but if the debaters are okay with it, we can go for another 15 minutes if that's all right.
Sure.
Fine with me.
Okay, especially Mark. Mark's in Germany, everybody, so he's staying up with us, and we appreciate it. Karag Nightwolf asks, for SJ, do you believe God is all-knowing and eternal? And if you do, can you please explain how he convinced you he is all-knowing and eternal?
I do believe God is all-knowing and eternal, and basically, I mean, how does that convince me? I believe the words of the Bible, and in the Bible, it makes it pretty clear that God is all-knowing and eternal, and I believe that. So,
you bet. Thank you very much. Tyler Durden asks, for both theists, how does one determine if a deity is lying to them? A lying deity would tell them it doesn't lie, so that's not a reliable means. You can't take it by firsthand what they're telling you. He says, how do they determine
that? Same thing that I said earlier. This gets into a solipsism kind of objection. How do you know your senses aren't lying to you? It may not be true, but we make assumptions on the basis of seemings with regards to physicality, our senses, and the gods.
there's one time in my life where I actually will make the claim, or will tell you that I have heard the audible words of God. Once in my life, in 2016, in October, or I mean at the end of September, I heard him basically give me instructions and tell me I was doing something wrong. And a few months later, it was quite clear that his words, which I followed and obeyed, were accurate. He was on the money, and so his words served to help me quite a bit in my life. So I know people will make fun of me all day long for saying that happened, but it did happen, and that's the simple truth.
You bet. Thank you very much. Next up is Jvis123111 asks, what does the Satanist Mark think of other variations on the golden rule, like the platinum rule? Do unto others as they would have you do unto them.
Oh, well, again, the golden rule, as far as I'm concerned, the golden rule ends at the tip of your nose. So the variations on the golden rule, that's up to individuals. For me, the golden rule basically is, don't be a dick. Don't cause unnecessary suffering or pain to other individuals. Don't steal from someone. Don't do something that you wouldn't want to have done to you. But I draw the line at allow someone to walk all over me. So, the golden rule has its limits in every variation, and that very well should have limits. But, the golden rule is just as subjective as anything else. It all depends on where you're going to set that boundary and what exceptions you're going to allow for that golden rule. Do you allow that to go across the board? Do you draw the line at unnecessary suffering? Do you draw the line at do you enjoy having your, whatever fetish you might have, does that go for everybody else? So you have to you can't take it all. You have to draw lines, and you have to make it as subjective as humanly possible, because that's the only way it's going to work proper.
You bet. Thank you very much. We have Brian Stevens. Thanks for your super chat. You've drawn some attention to yourself, as you've seen probably in the chat, SJ. So Brian Stevens says, what convinced SJ that she heard God specifically?
And before you answer, SJ, I want to say that doorknob heads, what they believe that God said to you was, SJ, be all that you can be.
Yeah, no, that's not what he said. He disciplined me, and it's embarrassing. So I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but I know that his words helped me, and I know that it was a male voice, a very, very reasonable voice, and the voice reasoned with me. So actually, when I've heard the people refer to a voice of reason, actually, that's exactly the experience I had. So
he gave just a quick follow-up to, I think, clarify. He said, but how do you know that it's God in particular, rather than any voice that wouldn't be from God?
I was in a hotel room all by myself. There was nobody else around. So.
You bet.
Well.
So, let's see.
There was a mouse with a megaphone. He was.
I personally was going to say that. To me, it's just I've heard voices too. Usually, just calling my name. Whenever nobody's been around, so
I've never heard any. I mean, I'm pretty old. I don't even say how old I am, but I'm very old. This is once in my entire life. I've lived a very long life. One time I heard something. All of the other years, all of the other days and nights, I have heard zero. So one time. So the person in the chat who thinks this is psychotic, goodbye.
Well, when you said mouse with a megaphone, I instinctively looked out my door, and lo and behold, mouse is right there looking at me like I'm insane, talking to myself.
For those who don't know, mouse is his cat.
You have a cat named... Okay, that just seems to be a labeling problem.
Yeah, well, SJ has actually encountered Mouse, and Mouse has defeated SJ in apologetics every time. That's the fact. Mouse bacons or you die. She can't refute that.
She can't.
She can't.
Nope.
Thank
She
you.
might not have touched pork in forever, but she can't refute the mouse.
Yeah, you talk
Right,
about
SJ?
bacon a lot. I'm not a fan of bacon. I haven't had pork since I was 22 years old. I don't like pork.
SJ,
You
SJ,
just don't
if
like
this
it, or
was-
is it a religious reason?
No, it's not religious at all.
Right.
SJ, if this, I'm just gonna say that if this was my hangout, you'd been muted for saying I don't like bacon.
Mouse is going to talk to you after the show.
Excellent. So, I appreciate everybody's feedback. That was good. We have another one from Andrew M. Shepard asks, I'm going to tweak the word and add a little bit to it. So just so it sounds a little bit more
Coherent.
He says, how does your Jewish God, I think he means like maybe Christian God, but the Judeo-Christian God, feel about so many raping the weakest among its flock and his child raping clergy? So I think this is directed, given that it says clergy, my guess is toward SJ.
Yeah, well, it says in the Bible basically how God feels about rape. Number one, he doesn't like rape at all, and basically that's quite clear in the book of Genesis. But also the idea of the clergy. The clergy are obviously acting completely against anything that they're supposed to be doing. They're entrusted to deliver the word of God, and instead what they're doing is the worst thing that you could possibly do. And all throughout the New Testament, it tells us exactly how God views those people, and he views them with scorn for doing that. That's evil what they've done. I left the Catholic Church thanks to those people. I had no personal experiences with that kind of stuff, but I left the church purely because of my disgust with that kind of stuff.
Good
Gotcha.
job.
It's a pointed question, but fair game. And so thank you for your question and for your answer, SJ. So next we have Lazarus, or forgive me, Plague Doctor asks, I don't understand why nobody asked, how can she know that those that SJ calls moral oughts are indeed oughts? She just asserts that they exist, is what they're saying. So I think he's saying, like, how do you know that these moral oughts like exist out there, rather than maybe if moral nihil.
James, if I send you the link to the two studies, can you post those on this in the thread?
Yeah, you bet.
I'll send you the link. There are two studies that have indicated that I referenced earlier when we started talking.
You bet. So next we have Lazarus. Jesus said, "You will always have the poor among you." So I remember this question. He said, implying that they are somehow a problem in society. He said, "Please ask the panel, so everybody, if wealth distribution is part of objective morality."
Who wants to go first?
Say the question again. I'm sorry.
No problem. It's he said, "I don't understand why nobody asked." Forgive me. I was reading the last one. I'm erasing it now. Lazarus asks, Jesus said, "You will always have the poor among you," implying that they are somehow a problem in society. And then he said, "Please ask the panel if wealth distribution is part of objective morality." My interpretation, I think what they mean is like, is it just kind of it's going to be the case that it's always there's going to be poor, and this is something that we just have to accept about the world? I'm not sure. I hope I'm getting that right. Sorry, Lazarus.
Well, I'm a little confused with the question, because I personally, just the way it's worded, I would say no, that wealth distribution isn't necessarily part of a moral framework, but as it's worded, to me it kind of just it seems a little odd.
I think that the way the question is asked, it depends on someone holding to objective morality, and I think that the SJ is the person here that believes mainly in objective morality. I've seen you argue for universal health care, so maybe to an extent distribution of some kind is part of objective morality. From the heathen view, we're supposed to fight for our society. We're supposed to, Frith, part of Frith is helping each other, helping those in your society live a better life, being the best example that you can be as an individual, and using that example to provide for your community. And the idea of you can use that to justify a kind of wealth distribution. I think that it's more easy to use that to justify something like universal health care. But with that clarification, SJ, what do you think?
I actually, just to go back, yes, you have seen me arguing for universal health care, and I'll keep doing that until the day I croak. So I do believe that everyone in the United States should have universal health care. All other developed countries have that. It's ridiculous that we don't. But anyway, I'm not going to go down that tangent. As far as poor people and wealthy people, one thing just to notice about Jesus, since you did bring up Jesus's example, was he was the one who was working with the poor people. He was the one who was with the prostitute, the woman with the well, the adulteress. He was the one who picked fishermen and a tent maker basically to sort of lead his show. He actually, in Christianity, the early Christians actually very much supported the poor people, and that distinguished them. And that was one of the reasons why Christianity grew, because their lifestyle and the way that they were helping poor people was completely different from the pagans of that time.
When it comes to the go ahead.
No, finish your thought, Russ.
Well, what I was going to say was that I think it just depends on the intent of the wealth distribution, the person who's distributing the wealth. Like, for instance, if you are giving money out to someone, that the action itself can be seen as a moral good, whereas if you are taking money from others, it just so that way said for them to not be able to feed themselves or whatever, then that could see as a moral wrong. But like I said, I think it just depends on what you're talking about when you ask about wealth distribution.
And I'll object real quick to something that SJ said as far as like pagans of the time. I think that if you're talking about wealth distribution, caring for the poor, as far as Christians versus the Greeks, right? That's what you're mainly referencing.
Romans too.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. That the Greeks, and to an extent, I think the Romans to a lesser extent, but the Greeks the Greek culture within Rome, we'll put it that way, was not very good at caretaking for the poor. On the other hand, if you want to look at pagans of a similar time, if you go a little bit northward, the idea of frith that I've brought up a number of times in this conversation does have a heavy focus on hospitality and caretaking for the poor. Those that are in need, you should be providing part of your household to them. It says if a traveler comes to your door frozen, let them in and give them the warmth of your hearth. That's a prime value in at least the Germanic pagan culture, and we can agree to find fault with the period of time of Greek culture that we're referencing that wasn't very good at that particular value.
You bet.
I think you have to find what exactly constitutes. Now, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. That kind of defeats the whole distribution of the wealth. In my thinking, do you distribute what you have in order for individuals to have well-being? Or do you distribute the wealth in terms of these people have material possessions? Because that's entirely two different animals. Universal health care, hell yes, everyone should have it. I think so. Should you get paid the same as being a janitor than working in a hospital as a nurse? No, you don't. There's various degrees, and unfortunately, as bad as it might sound, you're always going to need the lower classes and the lower castes. You're going to always have to have someone who does the dirty work. You're always going to have someone who doesn't have what other individuals have, because if you don't have this, then you're not going to have individuals striving to get that. They're not going to better themselves. They're not going to pull themselves out of the hole. Why should I not be homeless if I have everything given to me when I just go into a building? So whether it clicks with moral objectivity, I don't think so. Even in the Christian view, you have to work, you have to earn your keep, you have to give what is due to whatever societal needs that needs to be met, whatever governing needs to be met, whatever social needs to be met.
Mark, I agree with you completely. That's consistent with exactly what was practiced in the early church. Paul actually shamed some of the early Christians who were sitting in houses not doing the work they were supposed to be doing to carry their weight. And so the idea was everyone is supposed to work, everyone is supposed to carry their own weight, obviously unless you cannot physically work or you cannot physically do something.
Right.
But yeah, that was definitely a message in the early church.
All I'm going to say is careful, people, because we, with all this telling that everyone should work to help everyone else, we may be accused of being communists.
And I don't agree with that. I'm a capitalist.
Red matches my eyes. Red goes really well with my eyes. And I like hammers.
You bet.
We share an affinity for hammers.
I thought you would.
He's trying to convert you, Mark.
Very
He's
clever.
drawing likenesses.
Well, I could put a hammer by my altar. That's no big deal. I could put Jesus by my altar, although that would infuriate the wife, and the mother-in-law would come over and probably end me. Which is she? She's got the right to do it. She's a mother-in-law, so.
So we maybe just squeeze this last one in. Bobby, thanks for your super chat and thanks for your question. He says, SJ, you just get all the attention. He says, would SJ accept non-Christian supernatural anecdotes?
I would want to talk to those people who have non-Christian supernatural anecdotes and hear more about them. I definitely would like to hear more on anyone who has those anecdotes. I have yet to meet someone. I know a lot of non-Christians. I hang out with a lot of non-Christians in my workplace. I have yet for any of them to tell me they've had a supernatural experience, but I'm not saying that they haven't, and I'd like to hear more.
You bet. And thank you, all the speakers, for all of your answers, for everything you shared today. It's been excellent. Thank you for everybody in the audience for all of your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. Just to both respect the debaters' time, and also I'm like almost drowning schedule-wise, but we're going to make it. So I can't thank the debaters enough. The speakers did an excellent job, very articulate, and I totally appreciate that. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on. It's been an honor.
My hope. Yeah, me too. My hope is we'll get to have you back someday, and maybe even, like I said, fatal four-way in the sense of like the arguments over like, all right, we've explained these worldviews. Who's got the most evidence? That would be a blast. So, but anyway, in either case, we're thankful you guys came to visit today. Everybody's links, by the way, if you're in the audience, thank you for your questions. Great questions, really interesting. And everybody's links, all the speakers' links are in the description. Highly encourage you to check them out. Because even
before we run away,
yeah,
the chat is pointing out that SJ said that she hasn't come across any non-Christians that have had supernatural experiences. I can introduce you to a whole bunch of pagans that have, SJ. And a lot of the reason why a lot of polytheists are centered around supernatural experiences and the multiplicity of the different kinds of supernatural experiences that we've had. So yeah, it's just to give you, there's a door open for having a conversation about that variety. Yeah, and I have theories on that I probably would make enemies if I said them now. So sure. I don't think you and your friends experiences would very much like my opinions on the source of those experiences. But right, and
given that you did have some experiences,
if you're given that you're a Christian, I assume that it's one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that it winds up being a relabeling of some kind. That we're not taking the experiences at face value, that we're assuming that there's a demon or some kind of psychological issue behind it or something like that. Which you're right, you would make enemies with me. we would be getting into headbutting over that. Maybe that's a conversation for another time, but I think that it does require an extra step. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And your assessment's right on the money. You're right. So. Awesome. Thank you. And I thought I could have sworn, Duke, forgive me. I saw a super chat pop up, but then it disappeared on me. Really sorry if I missed that, but we want to say thanks for that. Duke's been, by the way, on Twitter,
Duke has been willing to kind of put his neck out for the channel. Once in a while, people aren't fans of kind of the nonpartisan style that we're trying to do, and that's okay. Like, I can't please everybody, but Duke's been willing to like support us, and the speakers here have been 99% of people have been so supportive. But it just means a lot that Duke. I've seen him on Twitter, kind of engaging with critics and saying like, "Hey, you know what? I don't see why this is so bad." Like, and so that means a lot to both your super chats and your support on Twitter. And so,
Well, I've personally said this to people that I don't take everything off of one set of tweets because A, I'm not going to go through everyone's Twitter feed to get the full context, and B, doing that, you are not getting the full context within just one Twitter thread. So.
yeah, I did read pretty much. I think I did read the whole thread because I wanted to know as much of the context. And it's true, you could always know more. But I just I still want to highlight Duke and say thank you, Duke, for your support. So.
Somebody in the chat just said, "Oh, it's a super chat that disappeared. Is it a supernatural chat?"
It could be. Very well. Duke's really supportive of a lot of people on Twitter. And keep in mind, boys and girls, Twitter is basically the manifestation of a character that individuals portray. But Duke's been very consistent in his support across the board, regardless of who you are, outside of, just flat out disgusting, topics and whatnot. But way to go, Duke. And it's okay if you wear dresses. Just shave. Just please.
Oh, is that a requirement now if they wear dresses?
Oh man. God,
Yeah,
that means
I've
got to do a lot of that means I got to do a lot of shaving now.
Yes, you do.
So that's excellent, and we appreciate again the debaters. We can't thank enough. So we hope everybody has a great day or night. In your case, Mark, thanks for staying up with us, Mark. We totally appreciate you being here. You bet. And so with that, we'll say keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Have a great night, everybody.